You and thank you both, Chris and Judge Tindill, for your comments and remarks as they were necessary, needed, and I was doing a lot of head nodding as well. I'll start off like just from everything that's been discussed thus far, and from my perspective, I it wasn't until I became a youth advocate and started like studying advocacy and using my experiences and my platform in a way to empower other young folks like myself that I understood the other end of it, right? So for me, I was a kid that was being removed from my mother and my father because of the severe abuse and the things that we were exposed to, but the things that were also inflicted upon us. But what became a point of resentment that I started to hold towards my mother was because I felt like she was giving up on us, right? But it wasn't until I got older that I realized she was trying her best to protect us the way that she knew how. And now she had her kids taken away from her. And now she has a legal system, a court system, telling her that she needs to attend all of these different courses and classes to be able to even prove that she's doing the right things to get us back. Whereas my father was someone that would show up to court every 6 months. And legally, you have to keep sending out the letters. You have to keep, telling him that you have a court date just by law to make sure that both parties are aware of what's happening and what's taking place. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized that it was easier for my mother to let go of her parental rights to us than it was for her to try to find healing in the midst of no longer having her children. And it was also easier for her to stay with my father because there was an instance where I had to come to court and I had to testify on behalf of myself and my siblings. And it broke me as a 12-year-old girl to hear that my mother then went and testified against me because she was still with our abuser. But it wasn't until I got older and I had to dissect those situations where I had to let go of that resentment that I had towards her because I realized this was just a generational cycle. She was exposed to different forms of abuse. Nobody ever told her or gave her the services or resources to realize like this is not okay. She got into a relationship that reflected the same thing, and then after getting her children removed, it was easier for her to stay with her abuser. And then when she finally did leave him, she ended up in another situation with someone who was similar. So in all of those things, I realized that there was a lack of prevention measures for both my mother and father, and also a lack of resources when it comes to the healing aspect and what that looks like, right? I think that that was a gap and barrier that I personally found within my state, which is New Jersey. So the work that I've been able to do over the years or shed light on different topics is to talk about the gaps and the barriers when we're specifically talking about intimate partner violence and what that looks like for families. I was a situation where reunification and prevention measures, it was beyond that. It was a case where the children needed to be removed, but what does that look like? Us being removed, but what does that look like for my parents, right? My father went on to not have to do any parenting classes, any type of classes to identify where his patterns of abuse started from, or like why that was something that was normal for him, and my mother was never able to heal properly. So I think about it in my work that I do of ways to like amplify that and continue to shed light on it. I do know that the Department of Children and Families in New Jersey, they do have different resources that have improved over the years, such as like rental assistance, um, shelter assistance, 24-hour hotline, stuff that wasn't in place before. And I think they've like implemented that to kind of address the issues of sometimes you can't deal with a domestic violence situation the same way that you might deal with another type of case, because there's like different layers to it that are not always talked about, because there is a lot of isolation, there is a lot of silencing, that's also not talked about a lot of the times. And what made sense to my mother at the time, makes sense to a lot of survivors or a lot of victims that go through these different things, because when we talk about domestic violence, it often doesn't just happen like initially after meeting your partner. It's a lot of gaslighting, it's a lot of nurturing, it's a lot of like tailoring a person to like believe that what you are doing is normal. We were isolated from all of our biological family. We were uprooted and we lived about 45 minutes to an hour away from everybody that we once knew. We went to numerous different schools, so our friend groups weren't the same, our neighbors weren't the same, our teachers weren't the same. So it was a lot of different factors that I only was able to acknowledge or realize as I've gotten older and be able to start my own healing process with that. And I will say, and I will highlight for any of the CASA volunteers on here who are working with young people, note that February is Teen Domestic Violence or Intimate Partner Violence Awareness Month. And I always think those conversations are needed as well, because I see a lot of my peers who happen to end up in domestic violence situations at the age of 15, 16 years old. And because more than likely they were exposed to it in their own homes. And now they got in a relationship with somebody that resembles their father or somebody that resembles their mother, and they don't know how to break that cycle. So I also shed light on that, because when you talk about high school students, when you talk about college students, when you just talk about young adults, that's also something that we also do experience within our communities and within our circles. So it's just finding ways to keep uplifting it. But I think the biggest thing that Chris, you highlighted, Judge Tindill, you highlighted, and just without this conversation is just finding ways to really provide supports to the survivors, that they feel like that they are part of the conversation, right? We can't have those conversations without including them, but we also can't have the conversations without also including the abusers, because they too need therapy, healing, conversation, support groups, and they need to know that your actions are not right. And I think sometimes a line is sometimes drawn when it comes to the Department of Children and Families, because I'm on that line of like, some of the things my father did, he should have been arrested and criminalized for. You can't just walk on the street and hit somebody over the head with a bottle and not get charged for anything, right? But my mother, on the other hand, this is her financial provider. This is the person that we're able to stay with. This is like our house. This is our everything. Like, this is her world. Like, she would be nothing without him. But for me, I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense. So I think sometimes there is a little line that's kind of taught a little bit, because it's like, um, DCF is always trying to figure out safety prevention measures and what that looks like. But oftentimes the abusers are left free. My father took the route of he wasn't going to show up to court. He didn't care that he was losing parental rights. And what does that leave me to believe? He then went into another relationship and did the same thing to someone else. So it doesn't end the cycle of violence.
I want everyone to think for a moment after just having heard Tawanna. Imagine a committee or a commission of people like Tawanna and men who got to the point where Tawanna now is. Imagine having a group of those people advise departments of children and families, police departments, so, nonprofit groups that are working on behalf of, imagine them saying, here's why this policy of snatching this child from this mother. I mean, how insulting is it to say, ma'am, you need to do parenting classes? Parenting classes? Are you kidding? I have 4 kids under the age of 7. They're getting straight A's despite this, despite moving, despite not having electricity, despite, right? I gotta go to a parenting class. So imagine that voice for those of us who are around tables who don't have any firsthand experience with what these people are experiencing, these families. Imagine having their counsel, their wise counsel, having gotten to the place where Miss Brown is. Just, they say if you don't, that's for all of us, whether we experience domestic violence or not, if you don't address your childhood traumas, your adult relationships will. As children, whatever we are experiencing in our homes, how we are parented matters. That affects us when we have our own children, we have our own relationships. It is exponentially so illuminated when there are children who are required to experience what Tawanna Brown has experienced as a child. Imagine having at 12 years old to go into a court to testify against a parent or for a parent. The things that we, have that systems have children do. Um, so your words, Tawanna, are really powerful. I'm always inspired by people like you who have healed to an extent that you can see your mother as a woman and a wife in addition to being your mother and what she must have had to um, sacrifice and endure to do her very best for you and your siblings.
Thank you. Before I ask Tawanna to speak further, Peggy, I believe you had a question. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. This is amazing, and it's so informative, and I'm really hearing you have to uh, be listening to it from the perspective of the people involved. So it's so important, but it's also striking to me, and I guess I'm just curious. It almost seems like some of this, it is not the same, right? Domestic violence and substance abuse are not the same, but it seems like domestic violence and how they treat all the people that are involved are like decades behind, right? We have that treatment. We wouldn't let somebody who is in substance abuse not go into substance abuse, um, you know, uh, training. And then, they do have that advocacy where the people that are now, recovered go out and talk to the other people. So is there any reason why this is so far behind other issues that we've gotten nowhere of listening to the victims?
Well, I think some of it has to do with misogyny. I think some of it has to do with what it means in American society to be a woman or to be a man, particularly to be a man. Um, I think Tawana alluded to it. If I were in an airport and someone walked up to me and knocked me over my head because they didn't like what I was wearing, there's no question that that person would be prosecuted, that I would cooperate and participate in the prosecution, that other witnesses would step up and say, "Yeah, I saw it. They came up and that bald black lady was just sitting there minding her own business and he came up and knocked her over the head." But when it's an intimate partner that you've known for a long time, that you've had children with, that at one point you felt safe with, at some point, right? It doesn't, as Tawana said, it doesn't start out. Sometimes people say, "Oh my goodness, how could you be with that guy? He's so," well, he didn't take you out on a date and hit you the first time, or he didn't take you out on a date and say, "You're never talking to your mother and you're never going out of the house, you're never," right? It's a slow grooming. It's a process. So, um, some of it has to do with culturally how we view the roles of parents, of men, of women, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a good mother or a good partner as a woman, and traditional male roles, what it means to be a man. Oh, you're going to let your wife dictate where you go on vacation or what you have for, you're the man, you wear the pants. Some of it is that, and it seems archaic. But even now in 2025, I think we still have, and we've come a really long way, right? Now you have dads that are stay-at-home parents. You have, but we still have a really long way to go in terms of defining those roles and what women are supposed to be doing as partners and what, how men are supposed to behave and act and the choices that are made as men. So I think that weighs very heavily on how we address this issue. Some people believe what happens in your home is private and you just handle it in your home, right? You shouldn't have any systems or government or, social workers or prosecutors or just, no, that's nobody's business. It's a private matter. So I think that has some bearing on that. It's also challenging, I think, for people who have experienced the abuse, that certain things are triggering. And so it's not, I think that's also hard, that, addressing the trauma. Just my opinion.
Thank you, Judge Tindill. Dilar, you had a question or comment.
Yes, I want to share some thoughts. Judge Tindill and Tawanna has mentioned that we need to prioritize prevention. I totally agree. And it has been mentioned misogyny is the root cause of this issue. In addition to that, we never teach women how to look for these red flags early on. And we do not teach them a man who wants to hurt you does not love you. A man who wants to hurt you has a personality disorder like narcissism, psychopathy, and these are structures of his personality. This is never going to change. And they get trauma bonded because this guy knows go hot and cold, mean and sweet. And this is a cycle that is never going to come to an end. And the point I'm trying to make is, I am an educator. We need to educate our girls, as Tawanna has mentioned, young girls, how to identify these men who have a problem, red flag, early on. So thank you for letting me share my thoughts.
I want to jump in here. Thank you for everyone's comments. I think the biggest thing that like we continuously see come up within this conversation, and more so like a call to action, is really to just keep spreading awareness. I think the biggest thing is that I found within my work and even in my own personal journey of healing is so many survivors of domestic violence are still so afraid to share their stories. It's still like a very silenced and isolated culture. And I think what has really made a change in the Department of Children and Families nationwide was after the case of 8-year-old Gabriel Fernandez, who lost his life in Los Angeles County because of domestic violence. There were numerous reports. DCF was called out numerous of times. His social workers failed him. His teachers failed him. The entire Department of Children and Families in Los Angeles failed that little boy, and he lost his life to severe abuse, and it could have been prevented. The amount of times that somebody made reports and said, I think this little boy is being abused. I think something is happening in the home. So I think like within that is just more of like a awareness piece where we have to continue to have conversations like this, because a lot of people are still afraid to share their stories. A lot of people are afraid of losing their children to the Department of Children and Families, and their children going into foster care and what that looks like. For a lot of these women, their children are their world. And even though their children are being exposed to violence or actually experience abuse themselves, it's like a hard disconnect. So I think that this isn't really like a a issue that it could be solved like overnight. I think there's so many different layers to it, but I think like everybody on this call and this platform that we've been able to create is a part of the working solutions and a part of continuing the conversations.
Thank you, Tawanna. Well said. And I'd like to ask